Welcome to season 3 of Dear Rach and Soph with me, Sophie Green, and you.
Rachael Johns, hello! I'm so excited to be back.
I'm very excited to be back because even though you and I are in very regular contact, I have missed talking to you, and we have so many episodes planned that I'll be talking to you
Same.
a lot.
Yes, I know. I feel like, you'll be sick of me by the end of this, and the listeners will be sick of our voices. No, hopefully not.
I doubt very much they'll be sick of your voice, Rach. They may be sick of mine.
Never.
You've also been, podcast cheating on me with Anthea Hodgson, so I've
I
had
have.
wounds. How
I'm
is
becoming
that
a,
going?
a podcast whore. Can I say that?
Look, you're a best-selling author named Rachael Johns. You can say whatever you want.
It's going really well, although we have taken on a lot of reading.
Right. I
Because
did want.
we're doing obviously our book club book a month still. If anyone's like, what's that? You can join us on Facebook, Rachael Johns Book Club. But we're also reading 2 books a month because now we are doing one big hyped book and one that another author chooses. And you're going to be our second author soon. And the first author and the second author chose ridiculously long books.
Well, I can still change mine if you
No,
haven't started reading it yet.
no, Anthea started reading yours and I'm excited to read it. They're
Well,
good.
see,
They're
I
books I
read it
really
quite
want
a
to
few
read.
years ago. I forgot how long it was.
Anyway, never mind. What have you been up to?
I have been up to finishing the copy edit of my 2025 novel, and I'm not
Yay!
being cagey by choice about the title of this novel. It's just that as you know, Rach, sometimes there are things that publishers like to withhold so that it can be announced.
Yes,
I don't think that anyone's necessarily waiting with bated breath for me to announce this title or reveal
I
the cover.
am.
Oh, there you go. But anyway,
And
it's
everyone loves the cover reveal. Let's face it.
that's true. Everyone
And
loves
I
it.
think, Sophie, there's lots of people waiting for your books. I mean, I see you get lots of comments on Facebook and Insta, but also you're very popular in my online book club. So
Oh, well,
I
thank
reckon
you.
there's lots of people waiting for your next book.
Thank you to your book club members. Well, as soon as I get the green light, I will be announcing the title and revealing the cover. But the copy edit's done. It was less painful than I expected because when I did the rewrite, it just felt like I was in this washing machine. I had quite a bit going on and work and outside of work, and I just thought, have I actually managed to do this cohesively? I really had no idea. And you know what it's like when you're just in the thick of it and you're thinking, does this make any sense? And it's such a
Yes.
disappointed process compared with writing it originally. Anyway, I got the copy edit back. I thought, oh, it's not as bad as I thought.
Do you know, I find that often with editing, particularly the structural edit, I think you're often going, am I actually making this better or am I making it worse? That's you really don't know, but I think it's probably, I don't know, I was about to say it's probably impossible. Maybe that's too dramatic, but I feel like it's probably impossible to make it worse.
Well, you would hope that the editor who's reviewing your changes would stop you making it worse. If you
And
like,
you've like obviously had some distance from it by that stage too. You've had
yeah.
feedback, you've also had time to think about the feedback. So yeah, hopefully it makes it better. But sometimes you honestly question yourself and you think,
Well, I
why?
think we've discussed this before where we get to a point where we're thinking, oh God, this story's boring. And of course,
Yes,
we know it so well. And we forget that for a reader who's reading it for the first time, they don't know what's going to happen. So
yeah, that's true.
I was at that point where I was like, oh God, I think this is really boring. And then I thought, no. You've spent months.
You've read it 50 million times.
Yeah. So it's fine. It's totally fine. So yeah, copy edit finished. And then over the past few days, I've been posting on social media about how you and I would like to devote one podcast episode a month to books that are newly released. Now, for the first episode that will be released in April for the April books, we're going to cover the January to March titles.
It'll be a bumper edition.
Well, the ones that people let us know about, because it's what we're relying on at the moment. I don't have the capacity to
Look,
ferret out every publisher's website. If any
no.
publisher, publicist, author is listening to us and they have a book that is out any month this year, please let us know. I will put
Yep.
contact details in the show notes because we'd love to be able to just let our listeners know, many of whom are readers, probably all of whom are readers in some capacity, know that these books are out because discoverability is a real issue. And now I know this from my country music life. So at Sunburnt Country Music, where I cover Australian country music, I have been increasingly focused on new releases. Now, the interviews I do are for newly released music, but I've actually become more and more focused on doing playlists of new releases. And now I have a new release podcast. Well, it's my main podcast feed has the episodes in, and then on YouTube, I started it as a separate podcast just to cover a selection of new releases. Also, I got an APRA license, which meant I could play the songs in the audio version.
Oh, that's cool.
So when, as a music journalist, I'm sent releases ahead of time, and I'm sent MP3s or WAV files, whatever. So I can actually put those files into the audio. And I thought, well, that's a good use of a license to do that.
Definitely.
Because I just know that with what I call the cultural imperialism of the Northern Hemisphere, we are getting crowded out. And you had a newsletter about this.
Yeah, I did. I think I said it was Aussie authors need your support or something, because as you said, we are getting crowded out, and particularly like it's happening in the book world as well. As much as I adore book talk in terms of the hype and the buzz and the excitement it's brought around books, and that now we're seeing particular genres like romance actually getting, you know, shelving space in bookshops. It's overseas romance mostly, and you know, we have so many authors here who are wonderful writers as well, and it's really, really hard to sort of not fight that fight what, you know, what you just said, the cultural field, but like to be seen. Yeah, it's hard, because I think what people probably don't realize is that Big W and even the bookshops to an extent have only a certain amount of shelf space
and budget
too. And so if they're buying overseas books, and we're not saying don't buy any overseas books, but you know, it means that our discoverability is impossible if we're not really on the shelves and things like that. So yeah, it's very important. So you and I, you know, put our heads together, and we did want to do something kind of about it. Also, I get sent, like I know you do too, a lot of advanced reading copies. And while it's so fun and I love it, and when the postie comes, I'm like, oh yeah, a book mail. And then I look at the pile getting higher and higher on my desk. And as I just said, I've got all this other reading to do, and I feel really stressed and really guilty that I'm not reading all the books that are sent to me. And so this is another place where, you know, we can give some exposure to those books.
Yeah, and look, various promises have been made over the past handful of years about quotas being introduced for streaming services. And there used to be more strict quotas in terms of our screen content and our music, I believe. And I think,
have you ever had those quotas in terms of books?
No, and I don't know that they would be workable, because
it would be hard.
Physical artifact. You could order a physical artifact from anywhere, but
exactly.
For music now with streaming and radio. So this is really about radio and TV and streaming services for screen entertainment. Quotas are really the only answer, because financially we don't have the big budgets that a lot of musicians, for example, and the record companies and the producers have to make things. And so that's, people can talk about a free trade and a level playing field. It's not level when we're basically like a little, I don't know, koala in the corner, and we're talking about a gorilla at the mouth of the cave.
Yeah, exactly. So we're going to try and do our tiny little bit to help.
And it is, we're doing what we can, because I believe in Australian stories. I believe in Australian storytellers. Obviously, I've devoted over a decade to Australian country music, because that's our storytelling and song. But I do think there are so many terrific Australian writers and stories. And they often just go unread to as much as, you know, they should be read more, simply because people don't know they're out there.
Yeah, and we're going to today talk about some reader questions, and a lot of that thing, like, you know, that's part of it too, I think, in terms of some of the questions that people have about why a book is no longer on the shelf, or you know, those sort of things. That's why often, you know, if anyway, we'll get to that soon. But are you writing another book this year? What's going on with that?
I am in discussions to write a book for next year and the year after, but nothing's firm, and still very early stages. But I will just briefly mention my other news, which is Sorrento Writers Festival. I will be at on April the 24th for 2 sessions. So that's the Mornington Peninsula, where Art Out is set.
That is such a lovely area. I'm very, very jealous. Put a word in for me for next year.
So I'll be there. If anyone's coming to the festival, please come up and say hi and or attend a session. And then in May, the middle of May, I will be going to the West Coast of Australia to be at your Readers Retreat.
Yes, I'm so excited. And there are still a couple of weeks left, only just about 3 weeks left to order buy tickets for this event. So if anyone's listening and is interested in coming to the Rachael Johns Book Club in-person retreat, we've done 2 years so far. Sophie's been there for one of them. And it's just so much fun.
We
Basically,
talked
a
about
whole
it last
weekend.
year.
Yeah. So you can go back and listen. A whole weekend of books and reading and authors. We've got 16 authors there. And so you can go to rachaeljohnsbookclubretreat.com and get the information. It is in Scarborough in Western Australia. There are also day tickets available now just for the Saturday. There's only a handful. So get in quick for those if you want them. So I'm super excited to see you again, Sophie, not long. And I'm actually, when you talk about festivals, before then, I am going to the Sunshine Coast Hinterland Festival, which you did last year, I believe.
I did, and I was invited this year as my publisher self, but I couldn't. I already had a pre-existing commitment because last year it was in October, and then they've moved it to May for this year. So I'm disappointed I won't.
I thought it came around quicker. Anyway, so yeah, there's lots of things coming up for both of us.
That is the Sunshine Coast Hinterland Writers Festival is that was its first year last year.
That was new, wasn't it? Yeah.
Look, I think it's a fantastic setting for a festival because the hint. I'm very partial to the beach area of the Sunshine Coast, but the
hinterland. Oh, it's beautiful, isn't it? Yeah, I haven't actually been there much, but yeah, I am very excited.
Mullany, Montville. So I really recommend anyone who is in the area or wants to drive out from Brisbane for the day, because it's not that far depending on the Bruce Highway traffic. But I will also say about your readers retreat that we were all the authors, and I think all the readers as well, were just high on the vibes for 2 days. It was
so if you need a bit of a boost and an uplift in the current times, who doesn't?
So it was just so lovely. It was one of the best things I've ever done. So I hope anyone who's considering coming, please come along. And even if you're on your own, there were some people who were on their own.
Yeah, there's heaps of people come by themselves. So
and they said they made friends there.
Yeah, you definitely do. We make it very inclusive, and there's lots of opportunities to meet people. But yeah.
So what else is your news, Rachel?
I've just been like when you said, what did you say? Something about a washing machine and you feeling like you're in a washing machine. So something like that at the beginning. Yeah. And I feel like I've been that since my book Outback Reunion came out in November. And since then I've had another book out, The Bad Bridesmaid. And we've had Christmas, and I've been on tour for The Bad Bridesmaid, and I've been trying to write The Lucky Sisters. And today I hit 97,000 words, I think, but we've still got about 30 to 40,000 to go, and I've got to have that done in 2.5 weeks. And so I'm feeling like I'm a bit stressed, but I'm also excited.
Just out of curiosity, because last season we were talking about, or you were mentioning that you felt your books were getting a bit shorter. So is this because you're
this
one that much?
So no, that this is what always happens to me. I say something like that, and then I don't know, something decides it wants to call me out as a liar, and it changes. So no, this is I've been worrying, oh my gosh, is this going to be almost as long as the Patterson Girls, which is my longest at 145,000 words. So we'll see. My publisher says she loves cutting, so
all right,
but I also have some other exciting news. I have signed another contract with Penguin Random House, but this time it's for a co-written book. And we've signed 2, we announced in my Substack on last week on Thursday. And so you can get all the details there, but I'm writing we're calling it a cromance series. So it's crime and romance with Mercedes Mercier, who is a crime author. And it's called The #1 Insta Detectives Agency. And yeah, I'm super excited about that. That's, something a bit different to what I've done before. And obviously co-writing is something I haven't done before either, but which we have talked about in being interested in. Maybe we'll do something ourselves one day. And we have some co-writers coming on this season as well to let us know how they're doing it. So I'm still baby co-writer, so I'm really excited about learning about how they do that.
So when will you start writing that manuscript? Or have
we've written about 10,000 words because we pitched the first few chapters, and then we've had to stop because I need to finish my current book, and Mercedes, did I mention, has to edit her next single release, solo release. So yeah, so there's lots of things going on as usual: podcasts, book releases, new ideas, and it's exciting. But we've already talked for a while, so we should get into today's episode. If
Our
anyone's
first
still
episode back,
listening to
so
us.
we had a bit to chat. So, but we will get into the reader questions that we have for this episode, and so this is just a collection of things that came through. That we don't have any names of people attached to these, but the first one is, why are there different covers for different editions of books?
I was going to say we should probably explain what today's podcast is, and we haven't actually said yet, but you've kind of launched into it. But yes, it's just questions from people about the industry. So
it'll be in the show description, and it'll be in the title of the podcast.
Yeah. And Soph, I reckon, I mean, I can explain this as well as you, no, not as well as you, I can explain it as well, but I'm thinking because you're in the publishing industry, it might be better for you to handle that question about why there are a lot of these. Probably you're going to have more information. So maybe I should be the interviewer. Sophie Green, I'd like you to tell us why there are different covers in different editions and around the world as well.
Sure. I was going to start with around the world because there are often very different covers between the US and other territories, and even between the UK and Australia. And it's part of what's really interesting about book selling and publishing, which is that readers in different places have really different tastes, and European covers as well. And Rachel, you've had books published in translation. Sometimes those covers are really different. So the US, sometimes because they have hardback books first, hardcover books first.
Jealous. I want a hardback. You know how much I want a hardback, Sophie.
No, you just never know what will happen. But they have dust jackets, and the dust jacket design is often very different to a paperback cover. And so if those books that were published in hardcover then come out in paperback, they might have quite a different cover, because that will be for a different readership, different booksellers even. And that American hardcover paperback market it can be quite split between those two. Whereas in Australia, when I was a bookseller, we still had some hardbacks, but then we started to move towards the trade paperback, or C, which is, I'm going to hold up Rachael Paris because it's nearby, but this is an advanced reading copy of Rachael Paris's See How They Fall. Rachael is a New Zealand author being published in April. So this is a C format. So that's more the standard size now for first release.
You've got a B format there too?
Look, possibly. This is not one I prepared earlier.
I was going to say I can find one. I got some.
Well, I'm talking. You can find a B format. So
actually, I'm going to keep going.
And A format, which is what we might call airport fiction. So those little paperback books, a lot of children.
I love them. They're very rare in Australia, aren't they?
For adults books, yes, not for children. Yeah. So do you have a B format there?
I do. So I hope you can sort of see here. That's the C format that Sophie held up first. For those who are watching us, for those who aren't, you'll just have to imagine. The C format is about the size of my head, and the B format is a little bit smaller. And so the C format usually comes out in Australia first, right, Sophie?
And actually, that's the same book with different covers. So there's
exactly. That is particularly why I grabbed this one from the shelf.
Yeah. But the book is How to Mend a Broken Heart.
Slightly different covers. Yeah, How to Mend a Broken Heart. I grabbed it from my shelf, so it's mine. As Sophie can say, the covers are different. So the first one is a purple cover with a oh my gosh, I'm bad with my instruments. Is that a saxophone?
It's a saxophone, yes.
Saxophone. I was right.
Or as Homer Simpson would say, a saxophone.
It's a saxophone. And we also have a little we've got some Aussie birds, and then we've got some American flowers on there because of the setting and things like that. But then on the smaller one, we don't have the saxophone at all, and it's pink rather than purple. Now,
so I can tell you how that would have likely happened, but sorry,
I was going to say, my theory is that they didn't think the first cover worked as well as they hoped. And so they decided to try something a little bit different to, hi, that's my son and his girlfriend saying hello.
Bonus.
Yeah. So they tried, and that's happened to me. Actually, the Work Wives, it's so interesting though. The Work Wives, I think I'm really honest here. How to Mend a Broken Heart, although it's one of my best reviewed books, and it's one I often, when I meet readers and stuff, they're like, oh, that book, I made me want to go to New Orleans. I loved it so much. And this book was enjoyable for me mostly to write, and I really love it. It's my least selling women's fiction novel.
And do you think that's because of the cover?
I don't know if it's the cover or if it's the title, How to Mend a Broken Heart. Broken Heart is a little bit negative. I remember years ago, I think we may have talked about this before, when the Patterson Girls came out. It was originally Patterson's Curse, but we thought that, well, the publishers thought Curse could turn people off. So I don't know. But then I have also had it in other, in the Work Wife's cover changed slightly, and that was okay selling, I think. And same with Just One Wish. So sometimes it's changed. What were your other theories, Sophie?
So if we just think about that book, How to Mend a Broken Heart, the color may have changed simply because they didn't want anyone to be confused. So they didn't want your existing readership that thought maybe they hadn't bought that book, so they might have bought it twice. Those sorts of things can happen. It's usually the context for most of these decisions is book selling. So they're thinking about what the booksellers might say. If they come back with a B format with the same color, they might say, oh, well, can't you make it look different? Because then it's going to stand out on the shelf more if we have it next to the C format.
Oh, yeah.
Don't want people to think that it's been mistaken.
Yeah, I thought people would rather they'd rather having the same, because I've had readers, well, not for me personally, but I've had author friends who readers have contacted them and said, oh, I bought your book again because it was a different cover and I thought it was a different book. And even some occasionally, years ago, I heard a particular author, her book was changed, not only the cover, but they changed the title for the B format as well. I know that's very rare, I think.
It is rare, yeah.
But she got so much reader mail, hate, because they thought that she had made the decision to do this.
So look, it can be because the original cover didn't do the job that anyone wanted. It can be because styles change. Now, if I'm going to be blunt about that first cover of How to Mend a Broken Heart, that purple's really heavy.
Yeah.
And the font is not as, so if that font were on a cover I was taking to a cover man, I'm being really blunt here, I would probably be told it needs to be more legible.
Interesting. Yeah.
So particularly the word heart. So you mentioned Broken Heart. I think that's a great title.
Yeah, well, I thought so.
Yeah. So it could
My
just
other
be
title for it was The Art of Moving On, but they didn't want The Art of Moving On because it would sound like it was a sequel to The Art of Keeping Secrets, which it is a linked book. Right. But they didn't, which I loved that title as well because it felt like it was exactly what it meant.
Well, keep it in your back pocket for another book.
I will, but then people will think it's a sequel to that one when it's not. But I just realized, as well as like different covers around the world are because of territories, and I guess also, like, I always sometimes wonder, like, I will often prefer the cover in one territory, and it's not always the Australian one. Sometimes I would rather the UK cover or the US cover. So, it's very hard to say that all people in the US like these sort of things and all people in the UK like this and Australians like this, because we're all, very different. And I wonder now, because we're so global, to me, the whole different covers seems even less of an important thing. Because
so you might prefer the UK cover for aesthetic reasons, but the cover is first and foremost a sales tool.
Yeah.
So that's where the bookseller element is really important, because the booksellers have their own expectations about how a book will look. And it can be that there's a novel that's put out in the UK and it has this lovely, and they do have beautiful covers there, lovely designed cover, but it can look too quiet for our market.
Interesting.
Because of other books that have been out in that genre.
That's what I was thinking also as well. It's also what's comparison on the shelf, isn't it? And so, like, we might not have certain books that the US or the UK have, and vice versa. And so they have to look at their whole market and we have to look at ours. Is that what you mean, kind of thing?
Yeah, it's everything in context. I'm very fond of knowing the context for things, and the current retail environment in Australia sets the context for every cover that we're looking at. And covers are the subject of much heated discussion. They very rarely are straightforward. If I take a cover to a meeting and I have a concept approved in that first meeting that I'm taking it, that's
how long do cover meetings go for? And I know this is for everyone. This is only obviously Sophie works at one publisher, and every publisher probably does things, slightly different, but they all have cover meetings right there. And the cover meetings, it's not just the designer and the publisher, right?
I was in cover meetings for 2 other publishing companies.
Yeah, I'm saying it's
same kind of process.
That's what I thought. Yeah. And like, so everyone's there, right? Like, there's people from all the different parts of the publishing house. There's people from marketing, sales, publicity. Yeah. Have I missed anyone?
And publishing,
and publishing. How long do they go for?
It really varies because it depends how heated the discussion gets.
And do they do like number of covers at once, like different authors, or is it usually like,
Oh yeah, yes,
yeah?
yeah, you have to
So
just
you have like a cover meeting and we're going to talk about all these 5 covers that are,
yeah.
yeah.
So there's an
Mm.
agenda, and then there can be multiple concepts per book.
Yeah.
And I often try, so the designer will send me a variety of concepts, and then I will choose the ones that I think work best.
Mm-hmm.
Take those. Invariably, if I took 8, then people get distracted by how
Yeah, yeah.
many there are, and it can
So
be
you
hard.
like narrow it down. And do you consult with the author? I know because I've been at 2 different publishing houses, and sometimes I'm consulted early in the stage, and other times I'm not consulted till there's like 1 cover.
It depends. So if it's a personal story and there's a personal photo on the cover, for example, or
Of course, yes,
it's the
because you do
author's
non-fiction
photo,
mostly. Yeah.
yeah, if it's the author's photo on the cover, then absolutely I consult them first while I'm writing the brief. So I'll usually go to them and say, what sort of photos do you have? Can I have a look at them? Sometimes I'm given a variety, and then I'll pick one or I'll pick a range, and I
Yeah.
will then send, this happened quite recently, I sent a selection of photos to the designer and asked him to choose, because I
Yeah.
just thought, well, I think all of these could suit, but he's looking at it from
Yeah.
point of view of constructing the cover with text on
Of
and
course.
sorts
Yeah.
of things. So there might be a photo that I think, well, that's a great photo, but it may not work in the design. So
Yeah. Because I think one of the things that people often ask, like I get often asked, and I'm sure you have too, you've got beautiful covers. People often ask when I'm at events, how much say do you have in the cover? And who has the final say? Now, my answer is always, I have a lot more say now than I once did. I don't know if that's because I have got more book sales history and everything and all that, and I'm more important, haha. Or if it's just because when I first started publishing with Harlequin, they only had 2 authors and they were just learning their systems and their process. So I didn't get any information at all. And now, then there was a period in there where I got to do a cover sheet fill in a cover art design sheet. And then I got so annoyed, not annoyed, but it took me time. And whatever I said, they never listened to. And I'm fine with that because I'm not a designer and I'm not in that sphere and I'm not, out there talking to booksellers and all that. So I, in the end, then said, I'm not doing a cover thing anymore. Just do what you like. And so then they showed me, nearer the stage where they've almost got something they like. And then with Penguin, I got showed a few different ones for the first book and that. So what I'm saying is that my feeling is that I do have a say, but in the end, if I hated it, I mean, if I really, really hated it, I think I'd be listened to. But that there was a book, Lost Without You, that has, I think I've got it here for those people who are watching. And if not, you'll just have to imagine again. There's a book, Lost Without You, and when I got the cover for this, so currently it's got a beautiful vase of flowers, and it's also got a photo and a frame of a woman in a wedding dress. The first concept I got had just 2 vases of flowers, no wedding dress. And I remember saying, look, it's really pretty, but there's no flowers in the book. It's nothing to do with the book. And I really think there needs to be a wedding dress. And I said, like, I really feel strongly about this. And I thought they were thinking, oh my gosh, Rachel's becoming a diva. But anyway, they listened and they changed it. And so I do think if you're really, really, really unhappy, they will do something about it. But is that true? Or in the end, is it the publisher?
it's true where I work, because we really don't want the author to hate their cover, because that's a miserable situation for everyone.
Yeah, yeah.
The author goes through all that work, all that time, all that patience, all the nerves, and then they're going out into the public, and they might be going to visit bookshops or do events, and they're going to hold up a book that they hate
Yeah,
because of the way it looks. So as a publisher, I don't want that. My colleagues don't want that. So
yeah,
no, this happened recently. We had a cover that we thought was great. I had thought from my conversations with the author that they'd be fine with it. We had a concept we loved, showed it to the author, very unhappy. So I said, right, back to the drawing board.
yeah.
I called the designers,
And you know what?
letting you know what's
Well,
going on.
so you're obviously happy for an author to say that. And I think it's also, I've other spoken to new authors too, and they've been very, very scared to confess or admit that they don't like their cover. And I've had friends in the past whose covers haven't been great for their first couple of books, and it has really had a terrible effect on their whole careers, right? Some of them are still trying to battle to build a career, but it's very, very hard if those first few books haven't, sold well. And a cover, yeah, sorry, what were you saying?
So because the cover is a sales tool, the publishing company does need to have the weight of influence and say in how it turns out. But I would encourage any writer who's listening who has a cover concept, responses to covers, we know this as readers, are instinctual.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I feel. So
they're visceral.
People don't like it.
That's right. If you're looking at it and going, oh, then probably
like I've looked at a few early covers of friends from early first books, and now I would say something. But early on, I was like, oh, I don't think that's. I one of my talents is seeming to know usually if a cover's good or not. But yeah, I think that's 100% something you need to fight for, that you think it's a good cover. Then those are the flip side too. I have heard stories where authors have, you know, because they've been in the art industry or had experience with design, not necessarily cover design before, that they have really put their foot down and said, no, I don't like the cover, I insist on doing it myself or whatever. And that's backfired too. You know,
it backfires because, as I like to say to authors who want to design their own covers, well, that's fine. Let's give the designer your manuscript to write. So there is expertise in cover design.
Although quite tempting now. The designer can finish writing the Lucky Sisters.
But book designers, there are some excellent book designers in this country. They do know what they are doing. And the ones we use, particularly for the sorts of books I publish, I use one designer in particular. His name is Luke Corsby. I use Luke over and over again. Luke and I have worked together now for 10 years on covers. He intrinsically knows what we are going to need in our cover meeting. He knows what booksellers need. A lot of covers for a lot of large publishing companies. So Luke just does not need that much instruction. I can send him photos, as I'm just talking about that cover I mentioned, photos. Here's the brief. And he and I will often discuss the brief. If he receives it, he might want to chat about it. And sometimes we'll chat once the first concepts have come through and I've taken them to a meeting, whatever. But there are some really great cover designers who just know exactly what they are doing, and they are experts, right?
I just looked up some of his covers. I see what you mean.
Yeah, Luke's an expert, and
he's got some good ones. Yeah,
so easy to work with. Like Krista Moffat, who designs my novel covers, she is an expert, and she has done so many beautiful covers. There are so many. I could go on and on about great cover designers in this country. We have several of them. So, but I would say, just back to the point about authors speaking up. Now, you might feel like you're being confrontational. There are ways of phrasing it. If you are feeling uncomfortable, you just say things like, look, I'm feeling unsure. You can go back to feel, I'm feeling unsure about that design. Could you please explain to me, I don't know much about cover design, why you feel that's the right design for my book? And then they might have some really good reasons. They might say, okay, well,
true. Or they might not be able to justify it.
Yeah. they might say, look, there's in your genre, these 3 books came out. We don't, by different writers in the past 9 months, we don't want it to look like that. We want it to look really different. And then you can start to understand again the context.
Yeah.
You are perfectly within your rights to ask questions. If they think you're being difficult, they're probably not going to tell you, and you're never going to know.
Yeah, true.
So,
and if your book sells well, they won't care, right? Because it's all about the sales and the numbers.
Your name is on the cover. You are allowed to ask questions.
Well, we should probably get to the next question. I think one of them is pretty close. So why do books come in different sizes? And I feel like we've almost done that, but because we talked about the different covers for different sizes. But I know people often get annoyed when they find my books, probably yours too, like, now. And they like having all their books on their shelf the same.
Yeah.
And they really want the C format, but they can't get the C format anymore because it's been out too long.
We can't keep things in print forever.
So why the smaller one a year later or around that time?
Well, most books these days do not get a B format.
Yeah, okay, that's another interesting thing too. So if you've got a B format, it's usually a good thing, right?
It is, yeah. It's because it's also, again, about booksellers and what they like to stock and who they think their readers are. So the B format is usually done once the C format's had its run, and it's a different price point. So the idea is,
I like the B format. It fits in a bag better.
Yeah, they're handy, and also for people who are price sensitive, it's a cheaper book and more portable. Some people do like the portability of them. The C format will then be allowed to go out of print simply because warehouses can't keep that stock ad infinitum.
Yeah. So the B format is basically there as long as the book is selling a little, a little bit. It might not be in shops, but you should be able to order it and stuff. But you won't necessarily be able to order the C format after a certain amount of time because it will stop being printed. Yeah.
So I'd say secondhand copies on eBay are probably your best bet.
Hey, when I said printed, should we talk about reprints? Like, how often do reprints happen in publishing, Sophie, and why do they happen?
So reprints these days are done possibly more than they used to be, because in the olden days you
Printed a lot.
tended to print a lot because it was like one and done into the warehouse. No, there were
Paper was cheaper, right?
I don't know. I think it was more that it was slower to print, and so you want to print as many
enough there.
good.
Yeah, I heard just this example, one of my favorite US authors, Ellen Hildebrand, I think it was her 4th book or something, got a like some sort of promotion, like some big magazine did a thing about it, whatever, and they hadn't expected it to sell that much. And this is before audio was like it is now, and before digital printing. And so they couldn't reprint, and there was none in the shops to coincide with that big
bad situation,
big need. But yeah, so reprints, how often do they happen? Is it good when an author says my book's gone to reprint?
Look, it depends. It's all relative. It depends how big the initial print run was, and reprints happen. There is no pattern to them. So these days we tend to print to order. Most publishers would be the same because reprints are faster than they used to be. So there's no need for us to keep a huge amount of stock on hand. On the off chance that may all be ordered, we can now print pretty tightly and reprint fairly quickly, and that helps to manage stock levels. And if we know a promotion's coming up, it also means we can reprint quickly to accommodate if necessary, or catalogs, for example. If you have a catalog placement that for Christmas, just say Rachel, you had a novel out in the middle of the year and then it goes into a Christmas catalog, the publisher would probably reprint to make sure there's enough stock on hand.
More in there because they know what's coming up and things like that. Yeah.
So reprints, look, you could have an initial print run of 2,000 copies, sell that through, and they'll reprint 200.
Yeah.
So, or you could have a print of 10,000 and they'll reprint 5,000. So
yeah. So it's all relative, and it's another thing that's all relative, which is the question we often get asked, is what the hell is a bestseller, Sophie?
Again, really,
people say, is it? I've heard 2 things, okay, and I want to know if this is true. I don't think it is, but I'm curious. So I've heard 2 numbers floated around the Australian industry. Well, we are talking Australia here because the US bestseller would be usually a huge bigger number. Not necessarily in the UK, from what I've kind of
depending on the genre.
Yeah. But so I've heard that 2 numbers. I've heard that 5,000 copies is a bestseller in Australia, and I've heard that 10,000 copies is a bestseller in Australia. Sophie, tell me. Is that true?
Absolute figure. There's no.
Because also then you can get like a bestseller tag on Amazon in like women who like compression socks. I just thought it was on my desk, right? Yeah. And then you can say it was the #1 bestseller, right?
Yeah.
It might not have sold anything.
That's correct, because that's about a chart position. So the other thing is we don't know what the charts are for ebook and audiobook because we can't see anyone else's.
In Australia,
so
hey, before you explain, can I just say one thing? Once I was in Big W in the book section, and I heard a couple of customers, picking up books, and they were quite disgusted. They're picking them up and they're going, oh, Australian bestseller, New York Times bestseller, Stump Top 10 bestseller, #1 bestseller, and they're like, geez, is anyone not a bestseller? Because it's basically, you can twist it, right, to put that on a lot of things.
You can, but also if they're in Big W looking at a display, it's highly likely those books would be bestsellers. That's why they're in
there. That's true. Anyway, back to it. So tell us the numbers, Sophie. What the hell is a bestseller in Australia?
There are no absolute numbers. I'm here to tell you. It is relative, again, because a children's book, for example, may not sell much in its first year, but by its 10th year, it could have sold a ton because it's been picked up on a curriculum somewhere, and then it's in its 10th year. And then
I've always wondered that. Like, also, does it have to? People say 5,000 copies. Is that 5,000 copies in the first week? Well, that's pretty rare in Australia, unless you're Liam Moriarty, right? Or Nagi, dinner lady, recipe to eat, right? So is it 5,000 in the first week? Is it 5,000 in the first month? Is it 5,000 the life of the book? It's
And it
all
also depends on the time of year, actually, because if
true. I've seen that myself.
you're out at Christmas, then the numbers are bigger for everything. So you might sell an amount at Christmas time that in June would make you a bestseller relative to other authors, but in December does
That
not.
has definitely happened to me. So, you know, the books and publishing, they put out the top 10 fiction, you know, whatever. I've had books, a handful of books that have got in the top 10 fiction. But often the ones that got in the top 10 fiction are actually not as high selling as some of my ones that didn't, simply because the time of the year they came out and what else was around. So people are going to me, oh, congratulations, that made, you know, wonderful. You must be so excited. And I'm like, well, yeah, it's good, but it actually sold less than the last book. That one did better.
And also there are plenty of titles that'll be bestsellers in audio that we don't know about because there aren't
Yeah.
arts the same way. So I think this ties back to our new releases podcast thing, which is that I really encourage people to just look at the story of the book they want to buy, read the top few lines of the blurb, look at the genre, think about whether the story is of interest to them. Yes, the bestseller tag is great to have on there, but again, everything's relative. Someone's bestseller is someone else's throwing it in the bin. So
Yeah, that's so true. And so before we get, there's a couple of other questions, but since we're on the bestseller angle, I'd really love Sophie to share a little bit about this book, which I think I told you about a while ago, called The Bestseller Code. For those who are not watching, it's called Anatomy of a Blockbuster Novel. It's by Jodie Archer and Matthew J. L. Jockers. And basically, these two people have come up with some kind of algorithm they put books through their code checking system or whatever, and they can tell, like, by all the books that they've analyzed in the past that have been bestsellers. Basically, I reckon they can tell you if your book will be a bestseller because of now there's only one caveat that they have, and it has been a while since I read this book, so you know, don't take me completely verbatim. Check it out yourself if you want. But the one caveat that, like, so there's a whole load of things, and I'm going to tell you some that I wrote. I wrote a list when I flicked through. But the one caveat they do have is marketing and timing, right? So that is something that, as an author, you can't always control, right?
And there's another I'd add that they probably didn't consider, which is location.
Ah, interesting. Do you mean like location being
Which country you're published in?
okay? Yeah, true. And so, shall I just give you some information about what this is not about numbers, it's what the bestsellers have in common. And when they're talking about bestsellers, they're talking about Jodi Picoult, Janet Ivanovic, David Badalci, Nora Roberts, Sylvia Day, Geraldine Brooks is in here. Paul Coelho, how do you say that? Patricia Cornwell. So it's quite Stephen King. It's quite a wide variety. James Patterson, of course, Dean Koontz, and Nicholas Sparks. There's a variety of people. And these are the things that they said, you know, they found out that were the same across the fleet. Theme. So the themes of most best-selling books are either personal struggles, moral dilemmas, and they're all usually, you know, about human relationships. I mean, that does cover quite a lot of books, right? But they're books mostly about work and the daily grind, interestingly enough.
Well, I'm very fond of saying people like to read about work.
Yeah, apparently they do. You're right. Pacing is one of the other things that they say. You know, the bestseller books have a really steady pacing, and by that they don't mean boring. They mean there's moments of high tension followed by moments of like emotional depth, giving the reader time to catch their breath before, you know. So it's really important, the pacing. They have a strong emotional character arc. And each of the characters do have a deep personal change, the main characters. So they're things we know about, but you know, I think it's good to have that reminder. And yeah, they also said, no, I like this. I'm fond of saying, like, what I really hate, the biggest thing in the book is boring characters to me. So they used a good word, and that is that most, you know, books that are bestsellers have magnetic main characters that, like, there's something about them that's really compelling. And they're all about their needs and wants. But I also thought this is interesting. You know, you often hear people saying, "Oh, the writing is beautiful" or whatever, but in the end, the best-selling books don't necessarily have the flowery language that might, you know, win poetic awards. They're accessible prose, they say, and they use, you know, simple language but sensory language and a lot of active verbs. Interestingly enough, this genre comes in here too. The best-selling books are usually thrillers or romances, and they're mostly contemporary, which I found, there's obviously exceptions to all of this, right? But this is overall when they were looking at the things. And they're books that appeal to women. Now, I thought it's interesting because a lot of books on there are like Stephen King and Jack Reacher and stuff. But what they said is it's not necessarily that they appeal to women to read. It's that they appeal to women to buy. Yeah, for someone they know. And then the final one, which, well, it wasn't the final one, but I put it last because it's always interested me, is the title element. And they said, "The remains the most successful way to begin a title of all time." And I thought, your titles, Sophie, I'm pretty sure. I'm just checking because I was did this quickly, but do they all start with "the"?
No, they don't. So
I
Weekend
feel like a lot of them
Other
did, didn't they?
Society, Art Hour at the Duchess Hotel. No, they don't.
The Bellbird River Choir and the Shelley Bay Ladies. So three of them do, and the Inaugural Lady. And I have a number of titles that start with "the" now. And my recent ones are all "the." Maybe it's since reading this book, it's been subliminally here.
You have to look at the list of titles that you keep on your wall to see how many start with "the."
Yeah, true. I have to scrap a couple. But they also said like 3-word titles seem to sell better than most. Anyway, it's very interesting, and it's just that whole bestseller thing is a really, I think for readers and writers, it's not something to get really hung up on. Probably.
No. Again, see if the story appeals to you.
Yeah.
Now there is another question. Have we finished the bestseller code? Because
I think so.
There was another question that's unrelated to that, which is why do mistakes get through? And I want to address that as someone who has an editor as well. It get through because no one's perfect and no one's fallible. And as I am very fond of saying to authors when they want to make changes on the page proofs, which is the last stage of the book, the later in the process you introduce change, the greater the likelihood of mistakes getting through to the printed copy. And that's just because normally if we're having the books delivered, it's edited, the corrections are taken in, those corrections are checked, then it proofread, those corrections are checked in, all those sorts of things. If you introduce changes after that stage, you have not had the benefit of several stages of checking going on. And just that timelines are fast for a lot of books, and we try our best, but sometimes things do get through, and sometimes it's just because the eye doesn't pick it up.
Yeah, and there's lots of people that read it, right? Because often you're not going to see your own mistakes, but there's so many people that read it. Like, I reckon, just in the editorial team, there's usually about 3 or 4, because it's, and then because you've got proofreader, a copywriter, a copyright editor, probably the main publisher, you yourself, and then there's other people. But I think what people often are like, oh, they're not working hard enough, or they haven't got a good editor. And you just said that's not the case. It's people do make mistakes. What it makes me laugh always is, I'm sure you've got plenty of these emails from people, "Oh, I loved your book, thank you, but I just thought you should know that on page 265 you used the word Karen instead of Stella." Right? And those mistakes are harder probably to pick up than like a complete blatantly obvious spelling error or the wrong, but they always say, and then I saw this mistake, blah blah blah, as well. Maybe they'd like 2 or something. I mean, hopefully you don't have that many in a book, but a couple of times I've had a few, and they can be fixed on next print runs and the digital
and in ebooks,
like that, in ebooks. So it is not a bad thing when you get an email like that. I just shoot it forward to my publisher, and they do at their end. But what always makes me laugh is the way a lot of people who send you a mistake, not everyone, but a lot of people will be like, "I could proofread your books. I would not I'm such a great proofreader," or whatever. But what makes me laugh is often they haven't even found all the mistakes, because someone else has emailed me last week and found a different mistake that this person hasn't picked up. So, you're exactly right. We're not all perfect. We do our absolute best. We put our heart and soul into making it right, but mistakes get through, and that's unfortunate.
Yeah, and look, I've seen your first drafts, and you are a clean writer, and mistakes, there are manuscripts that have a lot of mistakes in them. So the mistakes come originally usually from that manuscript that's delivered.
Yeah.
And we try our best to pick them all up. These days, the audiobook recording acts like another proofread.
Yeah, that's true as well.
Because will often pick up
before, if it's done before the print run, it'll be picked up for that. But if it's not, it can be fixed in other things, can't it? Yeah. So that's we apologize but we're just human. That's
We're
the
just
answer
we're
to that
human.
one.
And
There's-
look, we're trying to get you stories in a timely fashion and as best we can. And sometimes, yes, there are mistakes, and hopefully they're not too egregious.
Exactly. Now, there's one more reader question here that we get asked sometimes, and people have put in, and that is, do you use your own name?
Okay.
Um, so I'm happy to go first. I use my own first name. People often get surprised because they'll come up to me and they'll go, I'll get an email again, and they'll be like, oh, I think maybe we're related because my great uncle was Mitchell Johns or whatever, and he lived in the same area as, you. So I think, we might be related. And I'll be like, no, I don't think we are, because Johns is not my real surname. John was my granddad's first name, and he died around the time that I was thinking about this whole issue of whether I would use a pseudonym or not. I wasn't actually published yet. But I was really close to him. I didn't want to use my real name because I was a teacher at the time working in a Catholic school, and when I was first sort of starting to write, I was writing for a quite, sexy romance line, or I was trying to. And so I thought that might not go well at this Catholic primary school. Also, I had 3 young boys at that time. And I thought, if I do get published in this sexy romance line and they are one day teenagers, like they are now and adults, they might not really, that might embarrass them or whatever. So I just wanted to. Now, what I didn't consider back then was social media, because social media wasn't really a thing when I just first got published. But now I'm really glad that I use a different surname. I could never use a different first name. I've got friends who have a different first name and a different surname, and I would just get too confused. You'd be calling me across the room, Stephanie, and I'd be like, oblivious. No, you're lucky enough if I answer to my own name when I'm off in my own head with the fairies. So I would never change my first name, and I have friends who have, and I think they kind of regret it a bit. Or some do, some don't. But I'm glad I changed my second name because I can have an online presence. And I give myself a lot in my online presence. I'm pretty open, and I'm not like hiding. The people that follow me on Rachael Johns and that, they know how many kids I have. They've seen the inside of my house. They know what I have for breakfast. I'm pretty open, but I can choose to protect my family if they don't, it's just that safety thing. Whereas, although most readers are wonderful and brilliant, you get the occasional crazy out there now. And I think in this world where we're all so much expected to be online, it helps to have a little bit of a protection. So that's not the reason I chose a pseudonym, but it's the reason I'm happy to have one now. But I know plenty of people who do use their own name. I've also, some people are like, oh, I want my own name because I want it on the book. I'm not particularly attached to my real name for various reasons I won't even bother going into here. So that didn't kind of bother me. But then here's a warning to people. I also know people who have kept their real name being their married name and then got divorced, and they've been successful authors. So they've still got their married name on their book covers, and they're like in terrible battles with their husbands, not about the book cover, well, not about the books, but in life, and they don't want that name anymore. But because of their sort of professional life is linked to that name, they're linked to it. So that's, not that we're going into marriages ever thinking, oh, well, maybe I'll get divorced, so I shouldn't use that. But these are things to consider. Now, you, Sophie, I think use different names for different reasons. So do you want to explain how much?
We have covered my name in the past, but I will do it again just for the punters,
I don't remember if we had or not. Yeah.
So no, Green's not my real last name, and I came up with it when I was writing 2 home and away novels, and was doing it as part of my job, and just decided with the publisher, who's my publisher now, that I'd have a different last name. I didn't really want to change my first name, I think for similar reasons as you, Rachel, but and also I'm not attached to names because I have, as previously mentioned, I have 2 birth certificates. The original birth certificate is now null and void, but because I'm adopted, the second birth certificate has my current name, but I've always known there was likely a different name, and then I found out what the name was, and so names have never.
Similar to me. Not exactly the same reason, but Yeah,
I'm
there's
just
a
not that
similar reason.
attached to
Same.
having, my name is my name. It's like, well, no, names can be changeable,
Yeah.
and I quite like having a different name for my writing because it's a bit of a gear change for me. It's like, oh, I'm in novel mode. And the other thing is that I had, by the time I started writing books, established my country music life under my
Yeah.
name. And so Google search results being what they are, if someone had Googled my real name as my writer name, they would have come up with the country music stuff first. So
Do you know, sorry.
that's all right.
I was
Go
just going to say, I thought of another author story about names, which I quite like. And I'm just going to check that I'm using the right names here. But I think it's, well, I know it's Minnie Dark I'm talking about.
on. Oh, yes, yeah.
Yeah, hang on. So I'm just Googling a few things just to check. But yeah, Minnie Dark I've listened to. Yes, it is. I am right. So Danielle Wood is Minnie Dark's real name. Minnie Dark, we've done her book in my online book club. She writes sort of contemporary, uplifting women's fiction novels. But she writes under Danielle Wood, and she's written sort of more literary fiction, and I think maybe even children's fiction. I can't remember exactly
Yeah.
under Danielle Wood. And I remember listening to her talk on a podcast, and I loved this. And Google Minnie Dark podcast if you want to listen to this, people's, because she says it much better than me. But she's like, she loves sort of Minnie Dark is a completely different name to her. Like it's a different person. She says when she goes into her office to write a Minnie Dark book, she sort of takes on a Minnie Dark is a different person to her, and that person writes this type of she says it amazingly. But I kind of really like that idea, and I have heard there's a couple of American authors who have a number of different names for different things, or there's probably more, but one of them is Jane Ann Krentz, who writes also under Amanda Quick, and she has up to 7 pseudonyms, I think I've heard her say. And she
And
wishes
Nora Roberts, of course.
Oh, Nora Roberts too, JD Robb. So often people do it because they do different style of fiction. I think it's harder these days to do that because you have to then have a website for each, type of.
You
And
can't get a blue tick if it's your
no,
favorite.
true. And well, I can't get a blue tick. It's not my legal name. I haven't worked out.
Ah.
Oh yeah. Anyway, but yeah, like I think readers are not stupid. So if that's your reason, I don't like. I feel like some of my readers read my rural, some read my women's fiction, some read both, but I don't need different names. You know what I mean? Anyway, we have talked for a long time. Are we going to try and answer the listener question that not listener question, the writer question?
I think so. There was just one more listener question to answer.
I missed one.
We can answer quite quickly, which is where is it best to buy a book from? Because sometimes readers ask us how they can best support.
Yes, they do. They often
your local bookshop. Your local bookshop is a great place to start. Please support Australian booksellers. We have wonderful independent booksellers. We have wonderful chains. We have wonderful discount department stores like Big W. But also we realize that you will read the book in the format that suits you best. So if you want to read an ebook, go for it. If you want to listen to an audiobook and you have a Spotify premium subscription and that's the best way for you to listen, that's great. So that's my feeling.
I completely agree. And I also know that, yes, although we 100% want to, and I try and support Booktopia, our online Australian one of the books, even though they're reviving again, I try and buy books from my local bookshops when I'm in there and things like that. But I do, often the complaint people say is, the books are so expensive. And so I understand that. But instead of, if you can't afford it, remember libraries are really great places, and they do buy the books from, bookshops like distributors, and then authors do get public lending rights from libraries and stuff as well. So, we really appreciate, I think, people actually caring about, buying a book and making sure that we're getting the best we can, because as authors, we're not necessarily wonderfully well paid. The average Australian author, I think, earns $18,000. We're lucky that we probably earn a little bit more than that, but it's not the industry where it's so funny. The other day, Sophie, I met an old friend who's over from England for a bit, and she said to me, oh, my friend who doesn't know me but knows she has a friend who's an author, said, oh, is Rachel rich now? And she's like, so, the perception is out there. So I really love it when when readers do ask and say, look, what's the best way we can support you? And yeah, the best way is to buy a book in some shape or form.
Yeah, and actually I would say, people say, oh, books are so expensive. Well, it's $25 to go to the movies and that's 2 hours.
Yeah. I mean, I guess some people are not
out.
going to the movies and stuff now as
True.
well, you know, like, but I would also say, in terms of where the best place to buy a book is to support Australian authors, then at the moment, yeah, the best place and I'm putting aside like supporting booksellers, even though obviously I want that, but the best place to support Australian authors at the moment is probably actually going into your independent bookshops, because they're more likely to, raise the profile of Australian authors, where the big chains, even though we love for various reasons, you know, they're just buying the stuff that people are paying, you know, so that's globally popular. They don't really care about supporting the Australian industry.
Yeah, except I will say an exception to that is Big W, because I know that
They do get a lot of Australian books.
Yeah, they are really supportive of Australian authors. As I've mentioned, they're Australia's largest bookseller. So
yeah. No, that's true. I mean, I love Big W, don't get me wrong, but I'm just saying that, yeah, if you can support your indie booksellers, that's great, because I think we all understand that we all love walking through a bookshop, we all love browsing, but the only way we can keep them is to support them.
Yeah, and also independent booksellers are great at hand selling, and I'm saying this because I was an independent bookseller for several years, and
that's what I meant in terms of they're more likely to raise the profile of Australian authors and stuff like that, because Big W is great, and I know their buyer is very, you know, important, like wants Australian fiction to do well and stuff too. But individually on a store level, it depends who, you know. And some of the book, I know I've got a couple of the book people in my online book club, and they're so passionate about supporting Australian authors. But then you can go into another store where the person doesn't even read, you know, and they don't care. Whereas in a independent bookshop, the people are usually very passionate. And so, yeah, if you show them
a recommendation from them as well.
exactly.
You could go in and say, look, I love Rachael Johns' latest novel. I've actually read her entire back catalogue. I'm looking for a really great
something similar.
Yeah. And
yeah.
I'll recommend it.
Well, that was a long session of reader questions, but we do have a writer question.
Let's give it a go, because here we're chatting and
you want me to read it out, or do you want to read it out?
You can read it out, but I will say we have so many other episodes planned that I don't know if we'll fit this in, if we try to leave it. So
okay. So this question is from an anonymous author, and this says, I think a lot of people will probably resonate with this, and not just, she's a published author, newly published, but I think a lot of people resonate with this question, even if they're not published and they're trying to get published. So any topics around balance, or she asked, how do we balance writing new manuscripts when there are a lot of competing shiny ideas vying for attention, plus the uncertainty of getting another contract? So how do you, and I guess she's also asked basically how when you are wanting to get another contract, how do you choose one book over another, because you don't know necessarily which one is going to get over the line?
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's a few things to unpack there. So do you have any advice?
You always have to write something you believe in, and it can feel at the time like it's not going to be the popular option. But if you go for something that you think will just get you published and you don't believe in it, that's going to show on the page.
100% true.
There are plenty of writers who will do that because they want to be. I totally understand. I'm speaking now as an industry professional, not as an author necessarily, but there are plenty of writers who will think, oh, okay, like dragons are really hot right now.
Yeah, my husband wishes I would write some dragons.
Like so, and
just saying, not because he likes the dragons necessarily. He knows they're hot and he knows they're selling and he wants to retire.
Yeah, but dragons aren't something you're reading. They're not something that you're interested in. So if you absolutely, so actually let's use that as an example. You, Rachael Johns, absolutely have the technical skill to write a dragon novel, but your heart's not going to be in it. Because
I was going to say, I don't know if I do, but yeah, you're 100% right. My heart is not in it.
Heart's not in it. And so that's on the page. The heart that is in your novels now is not going to be there, and therefore that's simply not going to work. It doesn't matter how many books you have behind you, how skilled you are, and how much time you put into it, how many other novels you read about dragons, because it's not your inclination to write about dragons, it's just not going to feel good on the page for you or for the reader. And because it won't feel good for you, that's why it won't feel good for the reader. So you will be.
But this author is saying it sounds like there's a few shiny ideas,
which is great. So this is also about reframing. Okay, reframing the predicament into
anonymous author. You're getting some Sophie therapy. Anyway, go reframe.
So the reframing is, and reframing is something that's important in day-to-day life, actually. And it's not the Pollyanna thing of, oh, well, every disaster is an opportunity. And my particular pet
Man,
peeve,
I love Pollyanna. Anyway, side note.
my particular pet peeve, which is everything happens for a reason, because I don't subscribe to that. But
No, I don't either.
it's more thinking, okay, I have a lot of ideas. Great. So that we have had people say to us, where do you get ideas from? Here is a writer who has a lot of ideas. So I always think you write down the ideas that you have,
Mm-hmm.
just let them marinate for a while. Most of them will probably go away because they're not
Yeah.
ready for you. But the one that's kind of keeps popping up and is on your brain is the one that you really want to pursue. That's the story that's nagging at you now. We know in this weird process we're in as novelists that we don't know how that idea is going to manifest. We
Yeah.
don't know what the story is going to be. All we know is there's something tugging at us. And if that's tugging at you, it's going to tug at a reader, most likely.
Mm-hmm.
So at the very least, it's going to tug at you to the point where you want to spend time with it. So I'd say, great,
Yeah.
note down all those ideas, put them on separate pieces of paper, for example, put them all in a drawer or fold them in a book, put them away, and then, or keep it online list, whatever you want. And then just give it a week or two and see if any of them are still on your brain. And
Yeah,
if,
maybe take the pressure off yourself as
yeah,
well.
absolutely. And also think, how cool, I have all these ideas. This is great. Now,
Definitely. Yes.
take,
I
yeah,
used
sorry, go on.
to I used to get ideas whenever I was halfway through a book and I may have mentioned this before. In like when I was early published, I'd always, I'd be writing the book I was contracted for, and then I'd have another idea in the middle of it. And I think it was so much better when I had that than these days when actually I'm getting better again now because I've gone through burnout hopefully, and being kinder to myself a lot. What I said in terms of this, that's why I say to this person, don't put that pressure. I think I hear in this email, I'm so scared that I won't get published again, kind of thing. What's the best idea so I can ensure that's going to happen? Sadly, you can't ensure that's going to happen. So
Yeah.
what you can ensure is that you're enjoying yourself and having fun. But and doing exactly what you said, writing the book that excites you. But when I had lots of then I went through a bad patch of my writing and those ideas stopped coming. And so I think it's so reassuring to have lots of ideas, and remember, I think the other thing is we're all like, I'm guilty of this myself. It's like, oh, I want to get this book done because, hey, what if someone else comes up with this idea? And also I got this other idea that I want to do and this other idea I want to do, but we don't need a rush. In some ways, I actually made a note today, and I think we have either talked about this before or we're going to. And this is not procrastination necessarily, thinking about, other ideas or what to do. But procrastination isn't always a bad thing. Sometimes if you're procrastinating, it's because your brain needs time to kind of, mull things over in the back with that. And I think that for this author, what I'm feeling is that there's some pressure there that you feel like, I've had one book published. I want this to be, a career that keeps going. But so how do I choose the next best idea? And I'd say just try. It's really hard, but try and take that pressure off yourself, because you don't work. Well, most people, I don't work well when I've got the pressure. I've realized that, when I'm thinking about, oh, I've got a deadline. In some ways, I guess some people do work well under a deadline and pressure, but to me, I kind of, as soon as I take a bit of weight off myself and say, you've got a deadline, but like I've spoke to Sophie and she's given me therapy, during the weeks and stuff, it's not the end of the world. Books can be pushed back, once I take the pressure off myself, I really enjoy what I'm doing more. And I think for me, yeah, shining ideas are not necessarily a bad thing. Do what Soph says, but also try to just enjoy having the book out that you have got and to enjoy the writing process. Know that no one's career is steady necessarily, and that this is the harsh stuff. You might not get another contract immediately. The next book you might write, we've talked about before, might not be the one, but it doesn't necessarily mean the one you didn't pick to write would have got your contract, because there's so many other things at play, and the only thing you can control is the writing. So I would say be kind to yourself, work out which one you really want to do, and don't think about whether that's one that the publishers will like. I mean, to an extent, but you can also, if you have already got a book contracted and you've had a book out, don't forget you've got that publisher now, and you can go to them and say, look,
That's what I just wrote down. Use
yeah,
the
see,
publisher as an ally.
we're on the same wavelength. Like if you have got multiple ideas you like and you're not sure, talk to your publisher about them. Because as Sophie said with the covers and stuff, they know what's selling, they know what else is coming often. And, you know, they might say, that idea is good, but we've got something very similar. So don't
Yeah.
waste your time on that. And that's the good thing about already having an in publishing.
It is. And the other thing is to work out what you're really scared of. Are you really
Yeah.
scared of a publisher rejecting your ideas? If that's the case, then please go back to previous episodes where Rachel and I have talked about the fact we've been rejected multiple times recently. Like, it's not like, oh,
Yeah, yeah.
we're published regularly when we don't get our ideas rejected. I get ideas rejected on a regular basis because I'm prepared to put them forward.
Yeah.
I'm not scared of them being rejected because what I'm looking for is something that's going to resonate with the publishing company. And if there were an idea that was rejected and I really feel passionately about it, then I might pursue it myself and see what happens.
Yeah.
I'm more likely to just move on because I'm also not worried about not having new ideas. So try to get to the bottom of what you're actually scared of. Are you actually scared
Yeah.
of never being published again because you think that it's going to be like, oh my God, everyone's going to know that I couldn't get published again? If that's the case, this is the yoga teacher part of me now, that energy is choking you.
Yeah.
That can really constrict what you're doing, and it starts to show on the page because then you're loading up every single sentence with the please don't reject me energy. Like,
Yes.
please don't reject
I
this.
think I've actually been having a bit of that energy myself in the last I had to stop writing. Well, I didn't have to, no one was holding it, but like I find that I can't write when I'm in the promotional time, right? Like I'm doing
Rhythms are really different.
two or three events a day and travel, and I'm just tired and my brain is different. So I had to take 3 weeks off the Lucky Sisters because, you know, of that. And then I reread it, you know, and I really loved it beforehand. But then I'm like, I struggled to kind of get back in. And my fear kind of is, oh, what if what I'm writing now is not as good as what it was before? And also I've got a time pressure too, which is why I was saying to this person, like, try not to put that on yourself. And also, I'm going to sidebar here, but this person has said I just deleted the email actually, I think, but said something like, you know, they're worried. I've got in there the worry about getting another contract, right? Knowing what to write.
Yeah, it's the competing shiny ideas vying for attention plus the uncertainty of getting another contract, i.e., what if that idea would be the one that got me over the line instead of this one that I've chosen?
Okay. And what I was just about to say is, and it's hard to say that, like, it sounds, you know, probably weird coming from me who has got contracts now that are pretty much rolling and I am in a kind of good place. Doesn't mean I'll stay there. But I would actually make the most of being contract free, you know, and being able to follow your heart and do something. It's, you know, it sounds weird. We all want the contract, but you know what I'm trying to say. So if you're better at saying it than me.
Look, there are two competing parts to it, I guess. You're jumping without a net here. Now, you can either see that as desperately terrifying or you can see it as freeing. And again, back to the yoga teacher part of me, there was a time, and maybe this is relevant, there was a time when I used to write a sequence. In fact, I still write sequences for classes, but there was a time when I would write a sequence and I felt like I had to follow that sequence to the letter.
Yeah.
There was then a point, and it actually happened fairly soon into my teaching career, where I thought, I'm actually not going to plan at all. And that was it was scary, but it was incredibly freeing because I just thought what I'm doing then is responding to who's in front of me and adapting it. Now, what I do now is I like to have the idea of where I'm going because it's a creative practice to put that sequence together. I wrote one today for the class I teach on Thursdays. And that's very much a creative exercise. I'm like, okay, what do we need this week? What do I think we're working towards? All of that. But in the moment in the class, it will always change because I've given myself permission to leap without a net. I find it very freeing. It didn't happen immediately. And as I said, when I started out teaching, I had to have that sequence and I followed it to the letter, and I just was too scared to try to adapt it because what if I forgot what I was doing? I had to, all those sorts of things. But then once I was a bit more used to it, I was like, no, I'm comfortable here and
Okay. Yeah.
it's going to be creative in the moment. So I think it's not unlike this. When it's been your first book and you follow that sequence to the letter, it can be really scary to think, but if I leap without a net, what's going to happen? what usually happens if you have the skill base there and you have the experience behind you and you can start to trust yourself as a writer is that you're going to fly rather than fall.
True. And this person obviously, probably, I'm guessing, wrote a whole manuscript before getting it contracted.
Yeah.
And, so you obviously had faith and in that manuscript. So have faith again.
Yeah. Love yourself a little bit sick for the fact that you've
Yeah,
been published
exactly. And trust the magic.
just
And on that level, you go first about loving yourself
gonna
sick.
say, like, it's a really big deal. It's a really extraordinary achievement. I think it's really easy to look ahead and go, oh my God, what if I can't replicate that? But you've already done it once. Like, that's amazing.
And that, I mean, it doesn't get easier in a way, but also if you have done it, there's no reason why you won't do it again, so you have got that, that to know. You've done it once, you can do it again. I will also say one last recommendation if you haven't already. Read my favorite book, Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert.
Great recommendation.
I think that will really help you a bit as well. And the other one I've got here as well, which we're going to discuss, and I can't even find it. My desk is now like getting overcrowded with books, but I think we're going to do an episode of this season. Is Bird by Bird. There was some really good advice. That's the one, isn't it? Bird by Bird.
Yeah, Bird by Bird. Yeah.
So
And Lamont.
read not necessarily writing craft books, but read some books that will give you the motivation and the inspiration. So my recommendations are Big Magic and Bird by Bird.
And I've got to say, I listened to the audiobook of Bird by Bird, and Anne Lamott narrated it, the author, and she has the most delightfully quirky way of narrating it. So if you'd rather listen to it, I recommend that. But there's also is a good opportunity to mention the writer therapy thing that I put out on social media, you reposted, because we were talking about,
I mean, that was kind of a mini writer therapy, right?
It was a little bit writer therapy, and we have had 3 volunteers to come on the podcast for writer therapy. So we will be recording our first one soon. If you are a writer who needs some sternly affectionate orders from me and Rach, and you'd like some writer therapy with the codicil that we're not therapists, we're writers, but you can drop us a line and
we'll give it a go. We'll
try. Because I think that's it. It's I hope this podcast is helpful for writers. I hope it's interesting for readers. I hope it's entertaining at the very least. And I think you and I are similar in this respect, in that with anything we can do to support the community of writers and readers is time well spent.
Exactly. Oh, on that note, I think it's probably time for me to go make them dinner.
And it's, yes, you're in Western Australia. I'm in New South Wales, where it is almost 9 p.m. So yes, so long, farewell, auf Wiedersehen, adieu. And
thanks for listening, everyone.
Thanks for listening. Bye.
Bye.